Hello, everyone. Justin Manning, vegan financial advisor from Canada. Thank you so much for being here on my YouTube page. Thank you in advance for your consideration to like, comment, and share on this video, and of course, subscribe to my channel. Today's special guest comes from a background as an environmental advocate student at Yale with a mission to catalyze sustainable investing. I'm pleased to introduce the co-founder of YourStake. Welcome, Gabe Rissman. Welcome, Gabe.
Thank you so much, Justin. I'm really glad to be here.
Happy to have you. Happy to have this conversation. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say for everybody listening right off the top, this is for sort of education and entertainment purposes only. This is not by anywhere of the stretch of the imagination as financial advice. So with that being said, where in the world are you joining us from today?
Right now, I'm in Brooklyn, New York, where we're about to get a nice, beautiful sunset on a day that's a little too warm for the season. But I might, after this podcast, go take a little walk in Prospect Park, which I live 1 block away from Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And it's the only place I could live in New York, I think, because I need to, there are places in Prospect Park where you can look around and not see any buildings. And that's very hard to find in New York. So I do like having that, and happy to be here.
Absolutely. Well, for those who are going to be listening to this, who are in that area, make sure you reach out to Gabe. We'll tell you a little bit more about the website, where to find him, and you guys can have further conversations in person and avoid so much of this virtual experience that we're all having.
Yes.
So starting off, Gabe, the audience today is going to be everybody from never invested retail investor all the way up to people who are very integrated into ESG investing, socially responsible investing, impact investing at a higher level. But for those maybe who have zero knowledge about ESG investing, how would you define it? How would you explain it?
ESG investing really has a lot of different names, and it can be very confusing, and it has a history too. So ESG investing is a fairly new term, but a lot of people have also heard of socially responsible investing, which I think I'll start with. So really the core principle is taking into account environmental, social, and governance, the ESG factors, into the investment process. So that can a lot of times actually be entirely for a financial performance perspective. So there's new research, new evidence, and really good theories demonstrating the link between these ESG factors and financial performance. And ESG investing is just, hey, let's look at everything that is relevant. It's kind of just another part of good investing. And I think what your next questions will likely lead to is, all right, so what is the difference between ESG, SRI, impact, all these other things? Is it all about finding the factors that are leading to financial performance? And the answer is really no. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that would be happy to get into if you think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, we're two white males having this conversation. And that is one of the most fascinating and interesting parts about impact investing, ESG investing as a whole, is taking into consideration Indigenous people's populations, marginalized folks, and just bringing that to light and showing that honor and respect as it should be and should have been for a very long time. But moving on, if you could share your thoughts on similarities and differences, and maybe some overlaps between ESG investing and impact investing, if there is a difference or similarities that you could help the listeners understand.
Yeah, that's funny. So I love that you bring up Indigenous people and diversity, and obviously being cruelty free and environmental impact and forced labor. I mean, there's every social any issue you can think of is a huge part of this. But I think that the main thing that ESG looks at is not actually a company's impact on Indigenous rights, not actually a company's impact on water use. It's actually the opposite. It's what's the impact of all these factors on the company. So for example, there was an article that came out, ESG is not looking at a company's impact on water scarcity, but it's what is the risk to the company of being in an area that doesn't have water? How is that going to impact the company's bottom line? That is the company's ESG risk. Or from a climate perspective, it's not, hey, is it doing good for the world? It's how vulnerable is this company to climate change regulation, or to political blowback, or to physical climate risk, or whatever it may be. So ESG, I would say, in its purest form is not as much that. It's more, what is the impact of indigenous rights or whatever on the company. Whereas I think socially responsible investing, impact investing, values aligned investing is more what a lot of clients are looking for. A lot of times, portfolio managers, ESG is a great way to think about risk in a portfolio, risk and return in a portfolio. And sometimes clients use that term to describe what they care about. But a lot of times, what clients are looking for is more what we call values aligned investing or socially responsible investing. And that's more, hey, I mean, I don't want my money to be supporting, or I don't want to be profiting off of, I don't want to be investing in ways that are antithetical to my beliefs. I don't want to be investing in non-diverse companies. I don't want to be investing in companies destroying the environment. So that, I think, is the main difference between all these terms. And I think that the history of socially responsible, sustainable, yet what all the terms together, it started out as, honestly, faith-based was the origin, faith-based in the anti-apartheid movement in the 1960s, and it's now evolved into so many different ways that values and investments interact.
Yeah, and in terms of the evolution of ESG investing, what's your take on trends that you've noticed in the space, or maybe like ESG 2.0? Like, what does the future universe for impact investing look like in your lens?
Sure. One of the biggest trends, I think, the growth of ESG to where it is now, if you just look at the numbers, it was pretty flat in terms of inflows into sustainable funds. 2019, big bump. 2020 doubled. 2021 tripled what 2020 did. So that was where things started being actualized. But I think that the roots of the modern ESG movement were really created probably in the early 2010s, where the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board was starting to come up with a mapping of what are the issues that are most critical for each industry and each company, to be able to be specific, because recycling really matters for Coca-Cola, but it doesn't matter so much for JP Morgan in terms of environmental impact. The environmental impact is going to be different based on your industry and what you're doing. For JP Morgan, it's not about recycling, it's about what companies is it giving loans to, type of thing. So that sort of framework was already being used, but it started really being codified about a decade ago. And at the same time, the fossil fuel divestment movement started in 2012. And that was a major catalyst to the explosion of ESG, in my opinion. I've just heard anecdotally a number of fund managers and institutions and endowments and clients start to look at ESG in general because they got questions about fossil fuel divestment. So even if they didn't provide their clients with fossil fuel divestment solutions, those questions led to a deeper look into ESG and led to more nuanced solutions being created and led to kind of what we see today. So I think that's the main historical trend and where things really accelerated to get to where we are now.
And it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is where we're going in the future is almost like folks looking at this from like a manufacturing standpoint in terms of supply chain. It's really like applying that filter, that lens, that impact vision aligned values all throughout the supply chain of whatever investment might be, right? Talking to companies and all of that. Like, that's very top of mind from a lot of folks, and conversations you have in many different places today on Facebook and LinkedIn and Reddit, making sure that it's not just this company that I'm value aligned with, but if there's ownership at a level here, then making sure that bridge can be, that gap can be bridged.
I definitely agree that's the future. I think we have a couple steps to go before that. Like, most people don't even know what's in their investment account. Regardless of ESG, they wouldn't be able to name one of the mutual funds they're invested in or the ticker symbol. So I think step one is just understanding what you're invested in, and step two is if you're invested in an index fund, that means that you're investing in a lot of really large companies that you may have heard of that you might not know are creeping in your index fund. So for vegan investors, a lot of times vegan investors say, "Oh, I'm invested in Vanguard. I'm not invested in McDonald's." But what shows up in that classic standard index fund, it's going to be all the companies that are traded on whatever index that that fund is tracking. So I think that's kind of step two, is just realizing what falls within your portfolio. And then step three is mapping, all right, a lot of times, yeah, it's pretty clear that McDonald's is a fast food company in my portfolio, but we see when people use YourStake is an impact reporting platform. We help people construct and report and understand their portfolios and how well that aligns with their values. And it's amazing to see like the expression in someone's face when they pull up a report and they see, here's how much toxic air pollution is in my portfolio compared to the benchmark. And they say, oh my God, I never would have considered toxic air pollution being in any way related to my investment portfolio. That's really cool. So that's the next step. And then once we get there, where people realize every issue that they care about and interact with on a day-to-day basis also falls within their investment portfolio, then we can get into, all right, so now it's not just what Apple's doing, but let's look at Apple's supply chain and let's see what's going on with all the companies that it interacts with. So I think in general, the trend in the future is going towards transparency. It's going towards more accessible and understandable information, more explainable information, not scores, but actual data. And the other thing that I didn't mention is personalization. So a lot of people, let's take vegan investing, cruelty-free investing as an example. A lot of ESG funds, so socially responsible investment funds, don't incorporate animal welfare at all. And for a vegan investor, that's not what ESG means to you. Sorry, it doesn't matter what else is going on. That's your most important thing. So being able to personalize, aligning investments with values by creating portfolios, finding portfolios that are better aligned, that is a really huge thing. So that clients don't come in and say, I care about ESG, and the advisor says, all right, here's your ESG portfolio, but it's, what about ESG do you care about? Do you want to align your investments with your faith, which is a very common thing? Do you want to align with, it really matters on what the client actually cares about and what they're looking for.
Yeah, that makes me think like it's not, ESG is not this one size fits all necessarily in terms of your point about personalization. It's like saying, well, I'm interested in nutrition. And then whoever's on the other end of that trying to help you with nutrition, just giving you a blanket. And you're like, well, I don't even eat any. I'm allergic to half of those things. Like that doesn't make any sense. So that's a really good point about the future and the personalization. And so it should be, right? The empowerment economy, the green economy, the collaborative economy, moving away from scarcity and moving towards abundance, moving away from segregation towards integration. All these amazing different changes that we're sort of in right now. And I can appreciate you giving us those points, and really just saying where we are right now is really step one, where the veil is slowly being pulled back a little bit and people are starting to become more comfortable, more confident, more vulnerable in trying to have the right people around them to ask the right questions to figure out where they're currently at. Because the saying, you could have the best map in the entire world with where you're supposed to end up, but if you don't know where you're starting, how the heck are you supposed to get there? So that makes a ton of sense.
I like that.
I just picture myself in a forest and I got the right map and I know where to go, but I don't know where I am. How the heck is that going to be? So when it comes to common tips that related to ESG, socially responsible impact investing that people can apply, and then maybe also on the other side of that coin is the common pitfalls to avoid.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's very different depending on the audience and who the person is. I think the general point that is relevant to everyone is that there's this side of ESG and socially responsible investing that a lot of people never think about, which is proxy voting and shareholder engagement. And that's something that a lot of times, if I were to think about what is good sustainable investing, well, obviously that means investing in good companies and not investing in bad companies. And people don't realize that there's a lot of power that investors can have to be able to push companies to improve their impact by voting on issues that are raised to company management. And by actually, a lot of times there are investors that are organizing coalitions. And a great example would be the Climate Action 100 Plus, where a lot of giant investors are organizing, coordinating together, and they are pushing major carbon emitters to set real solid actionable goals and targets and practices to be able to decarbonize. So that's something that if you're invested in in that example, a climate aligned portfolio, and you're investing in good companies and not bad companies, but you're not thinking about how your vote and your voice is pushing companies either to stick with the status quo or to improve their impact. That is a tip and a pitfall. The tip is make sure you look at that side of things, look at the fund's proxy voting policy, or ask that question and try to understand what's going on. And the pitfall is not thinking about that and investing in something maybe that has good marketing and might have good portfolio selection, but it's not very. So a lot of times funds might not be very intentionally committed to ESG side of things, and they're not going to be doing shareholder engagement to help companies align with your values. So that's probably the first thing I would say. For advisors, a big pitfall, which kind of leads to a tip, is falling into what I've sometimes called the greenwashing trap, where there's so much going on in ESG, and it's very difficult to know. Well, there are so many new funds that have been created, and there's so many new products that are available. How do you separate the real from the not real? How do you know what's good and what's bad? And the pitfall is looking at an ESG fund's name or its ticker symbol might be very friendly. So the ticker symbol might be ESG whatever. Might have it in the name. Oh, that's so obvious. Here's a great ESG fund. Let's do that. And the danger is having the marketing outpace the actual practices of the fund. And this is also something companies do all the time. Companies put out these great messages, these marketing materials, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything. So the pitfall is trusting the marketing and the branding and not doing that investigation and doing that research and understanding what's actually going on behind the scenes. And the tip is to do that investigation and do that research and actually understand what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, naturally, absolutely. Well, that is a perfect segue into sort of the last question for today. Just to keep it nice and short, I don't have the statistics on where we've been over the last couple of years in terms of people's attention spans, but it's definitely getting smaller and smaller. So to keep this conversation short for the first time, maybe a couple follow-ups afterwards. But yeah, the floor is yours to please share anything that we may have missed, but more so as well to the whole purpose of why you're here, and special guest, is to share more about what you have going on at Your Stake and how you are really, making an impact. Yeah, please. The floor is yours.
Sure. So I'll go back in time a little bit to my story. I have a little bit of bias. I said that ESG started getting really interesting in 2012. I started exploring ESG in 2012, so I definitely have some bias there as to what the important time in history is. But my background is as a fossil fuel divestment activist, trying to push Yale to stop investing in fossil fuel companies. And at the same time, I was leading Yale's undergraduate socially responsible investment fund and filed a shareholder resolution asking Exxon to stop funding climate denial. And we did a lot of ESG integration work, and we're using tools that were available at the time. And after that experience, I wanted to understand what actually creates impact in impact investing in ESG. Is this all, is any of this real? Was my question. So we did an academic literature review to try to understand what was going on. And what we realized while doing that was that honestly, the biggest challenge in ESG is one, greenwashing, but two, the lack of scale. There are amazing statistics. Morgan Stanley puts out these studies. 85% of people want to align their investments with their values. 10% of people in the US, according to the CFA Institute, last year, 10% of people are doing it. So you have 10% doing it, 85% that want it. That's a lot of impact potential to be had. And our main question was why is there this gap? Why are clients not being served by their advisors to put them into funds that align with their values? What's going on? And we realized in talking to advisor after advisor after advisor and client after client after client, there's a lot of challenges with ESG data. And those challenges actually create a lot of fear among financial advisors. So the main challenges, the first one is the lack of personalization. Make sure if you're promoting your ESG portfolio to a vegan that it incorporates animal welfare information. The second challenge is a lack of explainability. So a lot of times advisors have an ESG fund and it's great. And hey, it's an 8 out of 10. Aren't you pumped? You got an 8 out of 10 portfolio. That's great. The client says, oh, 8 out of 10. What? No one knows what that means. What's that? What are the companies actually doing? What's going on? Do I have the same values as my ratings provider? And the explainability piece was really lacking. What are the companies in my portfolio actually doing? And the last thing is transparency, where if you have that 8 out of 10 and someone asks why, a lot of times advisors don't have access to tools or information or training to be able to explain why and still be someone that can guide their client through this journey. They want to make sure that they understand and can give good advice. So that's why we created YourStake. We created YourStake to have a behavioral values questionnaire to help advisors discover their clients' values. We created YourStake to make metrics more tangible. So for example, one of our metrics is not like an animal welfare score. Our metric is how many fewer chickens are you responsible for killing in your portfolio, or more chickens, hopefully less, but making it real. How many fewer fish are harmed from plastic in your portfolio compared to the benchmark? Those types of metrics make things understandable, and all of the data is there to back it up. So you can click on those metrics in YourStake. You can and see exactly, here's all the breakdown by companies. Here are the companies that are producing plastic. Here's the academic research that shows that here's the percent of single-use plastic that reaches the ocean. Here's how fish are harmed from plastic that reaches the ocean. Look at ownership percentages to attribute responsibility. So all that transparency is there. You can read about companies' petrochemical production and their supply chain and the downstream sales and the impacts of that. So we make that all available. So we really try to solve, again, personalization, explainability, and transparency. And that's our goal at YourStake, and to help people get guided through the sustainable investing journey with better data and better tools to help them understand what's going on and actually invest in the way they want to.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Gabe. You heard it here, folks. Short conversation, but a lot in here. The whole purpose of this conversation is to have retail investors who are going to be listening to this, advisors who are going to be listening to this, and anyone at the institutional level who's going to be listening to this. Make sure you do reach out and connect with Gabe. You can find out more on the web, www.yourstake.org, just sort of how it sounds, YOURSTAKE, yourstake.org. Gabe, it's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to the follow-up to this conversation. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much, Justin. Happy weekend.